Hello and welcome to the African Tech Roundup, episode 102 for the week ending Monday, May 15th, 2017. Now, this is where we round up the week's most important tech, digital, and innovation news from across the African continent. My name is Andile Masuku. I am extremely glad you could join us, and I'm really pleased to be back after a fairly long hiatus, a much-needed rest, and because we've been away so long, we have a jam-packed show for you that you don't want to miss. Happily, I'm not on the mic alone for the re-entry episode. Joining me on the show is Musa Kalenga. Welcome, mate.
Welcome back. What do you mean welcome, mate? I've been here before. Thank you very much.
Welcome back.
Thank you very much. Good to be here. Good to join you guys, and hopefully we can have an awesome show.
You're pretty much family at this point. In fact, I have some amazing news for our listeners. If you're a regular listener to the show, Musa, of course, needs no introduction. But if you're not already familiar with his impressive exploits in digital marketing and entrepreneurship, well, you just stop this podcast right here and go check out episode 101, and you will get an intimate glimpse at the man that is Musa Kalenga, a man I've come to know and respect. But what the real news is, Musa is set to become a regular guest co-host on the show. Woo!
Yeah. Finally, we've been trying to get this right for a while, so I'm glad our energies are going to combine. I'm super excited to see what's going to happen, eh?
One of those.
One of those. But
we still do that in the clubs. Do the kids do that?
No, they don't. That's hashtag not lit.
Hashtag not lit. Okay, so you can tell when the last time I was even near a club was. That said, welcome. Thank you so much for agreeing to do this at least every fortnight or so. Really as often as we can, you can fit us into your schedule. Let's be honest.
Look at you. Fit you into my schedule. Of course I'll fit you into my schedule. But yeah, as often as possible. But let's make it as regular as possible. I think we got a good thing going, as I said. Let's make magic.
For sure. And I mean, this is us listening to our listeners, because your episodes that you feature intend to have a really great response. You have a candor to you. You and I bounce really well, and yeah, people just seem to learn a lot from you, even with the fireside chat you did, you and I. So I'm really glad that you can have more of this guy, more access to the Zambian maestro. That is Musa. But yeah, so listen, I've been away, like you've said, a 4-country tour of Southeast Asia. That was awesome. But you were doing something a little more serious than relaxing in 4 Asian countries. You actually attended the World Economic Forum on Africa.
Yeah, I was down in Durban, which was lots of fun. A lot of discussions, primarily themed around this concept of inclusion. So there's a lot of debate and conversation around what that means across different sectors of society, across different industries. I was also very fortunate to have been invited to a really great panel, essentially for PwC. They were launching the Digital IQ study. Great findings, quite actually scary and frightening how far behind a country like South Africa is coming when it comes to digital IQ and their CEOs. So that was interesting as well. So great week, lots of conversations. They tend to be talk shops, so I think it's important for you to go there with a view of what you want to get out of there. But what is good is that I think people are opening up now around technology and what can be done. So encouraging from that perspective.
Yeah, I thought it would give you a chance to sort of ingest everything you experienced there, all the people you met, certainly rubbing shoulders with the world's elite, both in terms of, government leaders as well as corporate leaders. Some of the themes you've already touched on are themes that we'd like to discuss on the show. But I know you're a thinker, and you probably need the time to go, figure it out, and we'll touch on that some other time. If I forget, hold me accountable, listeners. We definitely want to turn some of what's talked about at these, lofty platforms into what it looks like at grassroots level, and we'd love to do that on the show, but we'll get to that. So we're all caught up, and before we carry on, let's do this. This episode of the African Tech Roundup is brought to you by Europe's preeminent African tech event. That's the Afrobytes Tech Conference. Yes, folks, it's going down in Paris on June 8th and 9th, 2017, and we're really honored to be one of their partners this year. I'll be speaking alongside a killer list of individuals like Rebecca Enonchong of Apps Tech, Chris Foyalan of Mall of Africa, Marsha Wolf of Lifty Inc., Defo Mohapi of iAfrican, Ashley Lewis of Ongeza Fund, Chidi Opala of Atlas Mara, Dare Okoju of MFS Africa, and so many more. Now, the event will be hosted at MEDEV, which is the largest entrepreneur network in France. definitely giving a nod to what the founders of this event, Amin Yusuf and Hawea Mohammed, are doing to represent the continent out in Europe. MEDEF, of course, represents over 750,000 companies of every size and across industry and commerce and services in France. So this is no joke. We mean it when we say this is the premier event on African tech in Europe. Only the best awaits you at Afrobytes Conference 2017. So head over to afrobytes.com to check out the full speaker list. I will be hosting a panel, doing a ton of interviews. I look forward to meeting many of you there. Check out the promo video, and more importantly, book your seat to the event. I believe you've just missed the early bird special they had on offer, but certainly still worth every dime to make sure you're booking your seat there. That's afrobytes.com. Can't wait to see you in Paris. And so with all that said, let's get straight into this week's news. Musa, we have a lot to get to because lots has happened since we last published an episode. We've narrowed it down to some of the most important stuff. Now, in terms of like the broader trends that are impacting our continent. So without further ado, first up, it's been a huge few weeks for the continent's edtech scene, aka e-learning. Most notable, of course, is the news that South African edtech firm Get Smarter, based in Cape Town, is set to be bought by the NASDAQ-listed technology education company 2U for nothing less than a cool $103 million in an all-cash deal. Now, I love the transparency in terms of the financial details of this deal. What's not to love, Musa?
Absolutely. With those kind of numbers, with an earn-out payment of up to $20 million in cash, subject to them staying and achieving some financial milestones, I think it's a great deal. I think if you look at edtech broadly, there's lots of people trying to solve for this problem, and it's really encouraging that this kind of transaction is happening with a company right here in Africa. So that's a great thing.
I mean, these guys create courses for leading universities, and I love that a great chunk of their revenue was made right here on the African continent, something like $17 million in 2016, generated by students enrolled with South African universities. I think UCT definitely being one of them. Really exciting to see not just a good idea, but a good idea that has serious commercial potential and evidenced by buy-in from a really large entity abroad.
Yeah, and also if you go down to the business of it, two brothers, Sam and Rob Paddock. I think that's also something that is notable. Family business is never easy. And I was actually just on his blog checking out one of the entries, and he writes, "Today Get Smarter becomes a global company, and today I am so proud of the 300 plus talented individuals who make the Get Smarter team that come before us." So they've achieved a significant milestone, and I think we need to take our hats off and in hope that we can get more of these kind of stories. I think edtech is something that's important to not only our continent, but as you know, I'm all about solving human problems.
Indeedy do. Shout out to Tommy Davies, the president of the African Business Angels Network. Why? He gets mentioned often on the show because he's almost a sage at this point, or a soothsayer at this point, as far as tech is concerned. I mean, he definitely said edtech is a trend to watch. Get Smarter, of course, having served reportedly 50,000 students since inception, completion rates averaging 88% for their courses. That's incredible. I mean, it's a multi, not even a multi-billion dollar industry we're talking about in terms of global higher education. Some estimate it to be in the trillions, definitely making sure they have a share of that market. To you, found this irresistible. Well done. Get Smarter for sure. And then, of course, staying with big e-learning news, telecom subsidiary BCX, which recently lost their leader, their longtime CEO, founder and CEO of late. However, nonetheless, they don't seem to have missed a step. They've partnered with We Think Code in a deal that will see them shell out nearly $4.5 million.
Yeah, that is a lot of money because I think the task they're trying to solve for in creating coders for the next generation of techies is quite important. But I think it's also important to know that the kind of the agreement also follows an internship position for all of the 40 We Think Code graduates. They'll be working in the BCX and the telecom group of companies within the next 3 years, which I think is great. So they're investing, yes, in getting the pipeline bigger, but it's fantastic that they're giving them a place to work as well. And we also know that We Think Code is not an old enterprise. It only launched in 2015. So it started opening doors for students that are 17 to 35 the following year, 2016. And it's trying to deal with a really, really chronic skill shortage. And they're trying to develop 100,000 coders in Africa over the next 10 years, which seems like a small number, but I think it's a good place to start, yeah?
Fair enough, and I mean, again, we're talking entry-level coders. I don't know what that means exactly. I don't know how industry-ready the type of people this program is putting out into the market are. It would be interesting to hear from you, any of our listeners who've interacted with, perhaps an alumnus of this program, or maybe you're in the program yourself. Perhaps the folks at We Think Code might reach out to us to let us know exactly what sort of skills they're empowering people with, and how difficult, really. Perhaps we're underestimating how difficult it is to actually turn, a clever young, 17 to 35-year-old into a decent coder. Their program, as far as I know, has been totally oversubscribed. I hear something like 40,000 South African students applied for the program, yet only 200 were accepted. And so big up to BCX for giving them the money to enlarge the program and hopefully, train a lot more people.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of questions, to be asked there as well, as you've said. So if we've got 40,000 students that are applying, it would be interesting to see kind of what the application criteria is, and if those are filters that we can open it up so that more people can get accepted. Would that help us to get that number up? But then secondly, I think it's responsible that they've been able to open it up to provide kind of on-the-job training, as far as Telkom and their group of companies is concerned. But once again, it'll be great to see and speak to someone and or interact with some of these coders that have gone through the process and have eventually landed a job, so that we can test some of these theories and ideas that we have. So it'll be great to chat to some of them. And if there are any listeners that have any exposure or experience, please get in touch.
Sheezy. Now, to Kenya next, where Safaricom CEO Bob Collymore has revealed that his company may well be instructed to separate M-Pesa from its telecoms business if the Kenyan regulator gets back to them with, hey, this report we're looking through right now is telling us you guys are a little too dominant for our liking. So what we do know is, there have been some reports, that have come to the fore indicating that Safaricom might be enjoying an anti-competitive position. And this is causing volatility in their share price, understandably.
But I think the Kenyan opposition lawmaker, Jakoyo Midiwo, has actually been proposing the law to introduce kind of the split, because I think from the Communication Authority, they found that Safaricom is a dominant player and they're experiencing a dominant position in the mobile money communications sector. So as opposed to them continuing with this kind of monopoly, they're proposing that they break the company up and introduce more competition, which ultimately we know that competition is good for the consumer. And I think M-Pesa through Safaricom has enjoyed an interesting position for a long time. The question is whether kind of this 40% owned by Newbury business will be able to do this successfully, and what it is that they'll be able to do. And I think further on we chat about the card that they're launching and what that means exactly for their business.
In fact, let's talk about that right now. That's interesting because, look, I mean, we're talking about a company that reported a 27% increase in full year profits, and mobile data also doing quite well. So it begs the question, why would Safaricom, at least this is word on the street, so this is hearsay at this point, but word is that Safaricom might be looking to, to launch a card, to, I don't know, consolidate its position, bring people on board, in a more, traditional fashion onto banking. What do you think?
Yeah, it's crazy because, I mean, you'd think that they've achieved something that every bank or every financial institution is trying to achieve, is that this kind of mobile transaction or mobile money world is something that people are still trying to crack. They've gotten it right, and now they're going also backwards to kind of introduce a card. So for me, at first glance, it doesn't seem logical. But as you said, maybe they're creating a gateway. Maybe they're opening it up as far as the first point of entry into formalized banking. And the only way to do that potentially is getting a card and figuring out if you can use that card to convert M-Pesa users into full stack banking users. So that's the only thing that I think could be, but strange. And as you said, word on the street, so we can wait and see. Waiting with bated breath.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen, Econet's subsidiary in Zimbabwe, Stewart Bank, come into that space. Well, Econet in Zimbabwe, of course, with their very, very popular, very successful mobile money service, their EcoCash, which plays very nicely with their now bank, which is Stewart Bank. And could this be the makings of, could this in fact even be Safaricom positioning to create a bank off the back of sort of sensing that the Kenyan government goes, actually guys, M-Pesa over there, telecoms over here, in which case they'll be ready to do it, in which case they'll be going head to head with all the incumbents pretty soon.
Stranger things have happened, so I wouldn't be surprised. But I do think that it is going to be an important thing for them to figure out. They've had so many regulatory battles over the last couple of years, so it would make sense for them to clean up the blind between telecoms, communication, and banking, and this might just might do the trick.
And of course, South Africa proves, I mean, there were people, 2-3 years ago who said plastic would be dead by now. And I think as a market, South Africa proves that plastic still has a place in the financial industry and its ecosystem, and how, values is derived. And perhaps they feel that perhaps as people become more and more affluent, or even as technology increases, plastic might stick around.
Yeah, it might. I think that's a fair assumption. I think the consumer base is still very much plastic users as far as their trust, and I think the unbanked by a long mile still believe in having something physical. Hence why even banking infrastructure, as far as kind of brick and mortar transactions and interfaces, is not going to go anywhere. So there's merit, I think, in that.
Fair enough. Now, how's this for a laugh? The South African Broadcasting Corporation, the SABC, now their current CEO, James Akuma, has recently presented his corporate plan for the embattled public broadcaster to Parliament. Now, if you are familiar with anything to do with the SABC, you'll know that they're very embattled at the moment. They're South Africa's public broadcaster, and hence why their CEO has to present, his ideas for how to keep them alive in Parliament. At this point, it's not even how to keep them alive; it's how to, keep them on life support. And so he suggested something ridiculous, which is why we're citing it in the first place, because there's so many ridiculous stories about the SABC that surface. If you are based in South Africa, you're probably just tired of hearing about the SABC. But they made it into our lineup this week because he's suggesting that to help the SABC basically change their fortunes, they're losing revenues, obviously fewer people watching television, paying their TV licenses. Hey, how's this for an idea? What about devices like PCs, cell phones, and tablets? Hey, I mean, people are using those to view the SABC, right? So please, let's start insisting that they have TV licenses too. Desperate much?
Dude, this is the most ridiculous thing I've seen in a long time. I mean, how can you take a notion like that and try and actually implement that when you haven't even gotten the basic tenet of giving people content right? I mean, SABC has been one of those channels that has been embattled by trying to put together the right content in terms of value propositions to make people keep coming back to them. The second thing is there's all these other channels that have come up of late around Mzansi Magic, etc., etc. I know DSTV have been boosting their kind of international or the Pan-African offering. So there's lots of other players now that are creating the right content. But I think your standpoint to try and say, because you're viewing content on all these other devices like your PC, your cell phone, and your tablet, I now need to tax you for that, even though I'm not even giving you the great content. I think it's ridiculous.
And the sad truth is that, I mean, it's a stupid argument, even from the standpoint of because you're not creating great content, you're not even a choice I'm making it online. Exactly. So
what gives you the right? Like, why would I now be willing to part with money? And they're not even collecting that well on television, let alone trying to get it on mobile phones. I find it absolutely mind-boggling. But stranger things have happened at the SABC.
And in fairness, though, what did you say?
Cloudy with a chance of rain.
Okay, that's an inside joke. If you Cloudy Motsaneng is the former CEO, and he's had so many issues, and that was an inside joke. But no, but certainly, look, I think I have a heart for the sort of socialist view that we need a public broadcaster.
Oh, that's so sweet, a socialist in there.
But yeah, but it's really sad to see that in a time when you need to be making the argument for public broadcasting by being excellent and leading from the front. You certainly can't make that argument by basically not delivering on your mandate well enough, and then making ludicrous suggestions that clearly show you're out of touch with the realities of the digital world. Yeah,
I'm a capitalist with a conscience. So I say, create the value, make sure that people buy into the value, and then you'll have the right to charge the fees that you want to charge. I mean, it's just, for me in this modern day and age, when people have got so many options, and you're trying to charge fees based on a non-existent value proposition, that for me is really scary, because I think organizations corporations the size of SABC essentially believe their hubris to the extent that they think they'll never be extinct. They believe that there'll be no challenger, and therefore I think at some really bizarre level they actually think and believe that by charging these fees they'll be able to rescue their business. And the capitalist in me says absolutely not. Create a great value proposition, then you can charge whatever it is that the market will accept. But this for me is, as I said, nonsensical.
And this could go the way many things, the e-tolls have gone in South Africa where, people just refuse to pay. So you could change the law all you want, make it, legislate and everything. People just won't pay. There's a clear lack of understanding in how some of these things work, which also speaks to another person in civil service in South Africa that trended in the last few weeks. South Africa's State Security Minister David Mahlobo was suggesting that social media be regulated in order to, quote, counter false narratives and sort of solve the fake news problems. Again, with laws being proposed like the Cybercrimes and Cybersecurity Bill there to try and protect us. Clearly, you're not even speaking to your contemporaries in the Justice Department. I find this disturbing from the standpoint that we've got lawmakers, not just in South Africa, but often in other parts of Africa, and with few exceptions, I have to mention, with few exceptions, who don't seem to have an understanding of what's required in terms of keeping up with the digital changes that are impacting our society.
Completely agree. I mean, if I had him in the room, I'd say, so Mr. Mahlobo or Minister Mahlobo, kindly tell us how this is going to happen, right? Let's be very pragmatic and practical about regulating false narratives, especially online. You're going to be one of two extremes. You're either going to completely turn off social media, which I don't think is the right thing to do for a democratic country, or you're going to try and regulate, which is a very, very slippery slope, because in regulating, you're actually doing the opposite of allowing people freedom of speech. You're saying you're going to be guiding and you're going to be moderating these discussions. And even so, the root cause is it doesn't result in regulation. The root cause is understanding how is it that you increase the levels of journalistic excellence? How do you increase the levels of understanding of sources of information and give them levels of accreditation that provide people a great newsworthy source? So I think the root cause analysis doesn't always lead down to regulation. I think it's lazy and I think it's not considered. But fake news will be there either which way. I think consumers get smarter about what they're going to be onboarding and accepting as fake or not.
I mean, there are activists also lobbying the notion that if African governments aren't responsible in ensuring that they don't cut off access to the internet or indeed access to social media, that there be laws put in place, switching off countries. And look, again, there's laziness on both sides of the spectrum. I feel there's like lawmakers who want to keep us safe and feel on the basis of that mandate they'll do anything possible, and oftentimes they don't even understand what's at play. Then you've got people who are responding in a very reactionary way to legitimate issues like the right to access the internet and how governments shouldn't be shutting it off willy-nilly. But you can't answer that question by sort of switching off an entire country. And anyway, so let's just say we hope sanity prevails.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. It's kind of exhausting, right? Like let's just hope that people do the right thing.
And let's move on. Let's talk about something that I'm really, really excited about. Scientists having found a way to remove the HIV virus from a mouse using CRISPR/Cas9 tech. I've read think pieces on the thing, and I've actually been to the journal where these discoveries were outlaid. I barely understood a thing. What I did understand though is that there's a mouse that was HIV positive. They were able to grab that mouse's DNA and isolate the HIV virus to prevent it from replicating in the mouse's body, and they actually got results. I'm super excited about that.
Yeah, I think once again, I mean, this is one of those really exciting advances from science perspective that's solving a key problem. I think from that perspective, it's encouraging, although they did say that it's still very early stages.
So human trials are still a ways away, because from here it's more mice and then more mice, and then human beings. But definitely something moving in the right direction. If you want to check it out, go check out the journal Molecular Therapy. You'll find those findings left there. It's quite an international group of scientists. I didn't spot any Africans involved in the research, but they probably are. Who's to say? But nonetheless, wherever this breakthrough is made, I am happy for the planet, period.
Yeah, I think it's a good thing all around. Nobody loses, everybody benefits. So I say go CRISPR-Cas9.
and of course, just barely a week after that malaria vaccine trial was announced, actually 2 weeks probably at this point. So it's definitely a good week for major sort of leaps forward as far as these two very critical diseases.
Yeah, medical science. I think it's important that we continue to kind of surface these stories, because I wasn't aware of it, but the last reference point I generally had to HIV and AIDS is that we're trying to figure it out, but we haven't actually made any progress. So I think it's good that that there is a step in the right direction. I also would be interested in seeing how far they are from actual commercialization. I mean, they don't give much detail around that. We do know in Africa we've got a crisis. We've got a number of people affected by HIV/AIDS virus, and also the second thing, whether this is going to be the kind of solution that's accessible to the man on the street, because often these kind of medical interventions are accessible, but they'll cost you an arm and a leg. So that'll also be a very interesting thing to see.
Which is also true for the malaria vaccine. Well, how much will it cost? Okay, so right now they're still trying to figure out whether it will be, if they can improve its efficacy. Also, the question is, will it be affordable? We've faltered at providing things that will basically prevent the illness in the form of medication and mosquito nets. Will we succeed at sort of rolling out a vaccine? Africa, I hope the answer is yes.
Hope so too. So we're going to watch that a little bit closely. But if anybody has better knowledge, so if we've got any medical journalists out there or scientists, I think get in touch. Give us a little bit of understanding.
I can see them shaking their heads now, going, these guys. Listen.
CRISPR-Cas9, I'm sorry.
Look, all we're saying is the world's that much better because of this discovery. That's all.
Yeah, so please forgive us in advance. But yeah, get in touch and correct us should you need to do that.
And they will, though.
That's okay too.
The internet. And so next up, MTN has shut down its video streaming service, MTN View. No tears lost there. What they have done in doing so is promise that they will make future media plays whenever. Don't worry, we're not holding our breath. What's interesting to me more than that is that there's a streaming video on demand service that's been launched by the very people that MTN had partnered to make View. They are set to launch in South Africa. They're launching something called DEOD, a new service. So we'll see whether they'll succeed where their partnership with MTN failed. And then a biggie coming to North Africa and the Middle East, already having launched there and planning launches for the rest of the continent. iFlix. Now, we spoke about this before we went on break. Definitely some rumbles I've picked up in sort of speaking to people in the space about their entry, because they've done quite many interesting things in the Asian market, and I actually observed while I was out there.
I wonder what the approach is going to be for the Africa market. I mean, the importance of catalog and content is going to be key. I think we saw that with Aroko Nigeria. So I'm quite interested to see what their entry strategy is going to be, and what are the rumblings that you've been hearing?
Look, they've done a great job in Asia. They've, like you say, it's about market entry. It's about this ability to enthuse the audience, which I feel like Netflix hasn't quite been able to do at the lower end of the pyramid. In the local market. Look, we have to be fair in stating that in terms of high-end video on demand, DSTV when they're offering Showmax are still the ones to beat, not least because they've got all this the massive licensing potential that they've had for years. We're seeing sort of Kwese snapping at their heels, signing big deals with the likes of ESPN and CNN and that kind of thing. But for the stuff that the most valuable viewers want, it certainly does seem that DSTV in their sort of cable offerings as well as their video on demand services are winning the day, at least for now. Netflix and their original content, on the other hand, Iroko with their original African content, on the other hand. So the question is, where is iFlix going to come in, and they're potentially going to cause a few hassles for everybody, and there's a little uncertainty in every place. So that's kind of what I've gauged.
And obviously the other kind of key factor whether they're going to succeed or not is their price point. So coming into a market like the African market, I think I've just gone onto their site quickly. So they got Flash, Mr. Robot, The Good Wife, House of Lies. Those kind of that kind of content is typically for a more affluent consumer, typically a more travel consumer. So an entry strategy price may not be such an issue, but once you start playing in the kind of Iroko space where you're trying to create more homegrown content, I wonder whether they'll be able to adjust and pivot their business model enough, or whether they're going to have the balls to come in guns blazing and try and take a little bit from everybody, as you've said. So once again, an interesting one to watch, but lots of stuff happening in the video demand space. And hopefully, as I said, the consumer wins at the end of the day.
And of course, North Africa, tell us. I mean, you've got them, they've rolled out in your part of the world right now, in your part of the continent. Please tell us whether you're enjoying it, indeed in the Middle East as well. And of course, if you're listening to us from a place where iFlix is strong, in Asia, please tell us what it is you love about them. And perhaps they might be doing better than, say, a Netflix or an Amazon. Let's talk Nigerian e-commerce news next. Conga launched their grocery service in Lagos. Okay.
That's wonderful, Oga. I can now get my stuff delivered to my house, which is fantastic.
But they're not first to market with the idea, but I'm betting on them out executing anything that's currently out there.
Yeah, they got balance sheet. I think that's different from a lot of the other entrants. And I went on their site, and you can buy stuff like a cow's liver, you can buy a shin and that kind of stuff, which I think is clever. Also understanding how Nigeria commerce works. I mean, most of it being 98% probably of it being highly informal, and the reality of being in Nigeria around logistics of getting to shopping malls and that kind of thing. I think it's a much needed solution. I think the trick, once again, the devil will be in the execution. I think I don't think you can question the fact that there's a need for this kind of service. The question will be, will they be able to do their 24-hour turnaround as they promise on their website? Essentially allowing them to try and get from a position where someone has ordered and getting their stuff within a day.
Well, tell us, Nigeria, because that's an interesting thing to me. How long are you willing to wait for your liver?
Not long, I'm pretty sure. If you're hungry, right? But they do have perishable foods and they have non-perishable foods, and I think there'll be a difference from the different product types. But once again, I mean, I think 24 hours is a fair time, but for food, is that, do people plan ahead enough to say, I'm going to need my groceries tomorrow? Or is it more of an impulse purchase? I'm on my way home, I'll stop, at the side of the road and there'll be someone selling vegetables, and that's how I get my vegetables. Will they be able to shift enough from the consumer behavior? But, we'll wait and see.
I've got mates in Nigeria who just reckon like e-commerce in Nigeria is just promises, and very rarely delivering on that promise in as far as like efficiency and that kind of thing. And understandable. I mean, the infrastructure companies like Conga have to sort of overcome just to deliver something. It's a logistical nightmare. So I think this is a play for the future. I don't see the addressable market in this space anywhere near where it needs to be for this to be viable. I could be wrong. Folks at Conga, set me straight. Maybe like mobile penetration of the masses has reached the stage where like people are not only in a position to have your app on their phone or use your service, but like actively willing to do so, because those are two very different things from an onboarding standpoint. Do the people you're trying to service have the tool in order to access your service? 1, 2, do they have the willingness? And if they do have the willingness, are you in a position to actually get them to act on that willingness? I'm not sure, e-commerce in the grocery space in Nigeria is all the way there yet.
Yeah, that's actually what I was going to say. Is that, is your view e-commerce in general, or is it e-commerce in the grocery space? Because I suppose one of the key things to consider that Nigeria has very different to a place like South Africa, as an example, is the number of kind of, when I say decent, kind of structured retail outlets like malls and strip malls and that kind of thing. So in Nigeria, you have none of that, right? But you still have a growing middle class and upper class base of consumers that want specific things and or have certain expectations. So if you look at e-commerce, on other aspects, so retail, luxury goods, etc., Nigerians are ordering stuff from the US, from everywhere. And yes, those don't take 24 hours to deliver, but it still requires a maturity of a consumer. So the question I suppose you're asking, and I think I concur having thought about it, is that can you transpose that behavior to a product like a grocery or a product like tin food or perishables, and will you have the same uptake? And I think the jury's out there. That's going to be an interesting one to watch. I doubt Congo would have done that without doing their market research, but we have to wait and see. And I wish them every success. It's certainly going to be a huge opportunity if they win. And then I think the secondary opportunity is going to be big brands like Unilever, Procter & Gamble. Those kind of guys are all trying to figure out e-commerce in their own right. So if they figure out some kind of last mile solution that can validate the fact that Nigerians want to order tin beans and a little bit of osu, and they'll get it in 24 hours, I think there's a lot to be said about how you can expand that to things like Pampers and dairy and the rest of it. So I think if they get it right, there's a halo benefit for FMCG as an industry.
And then there's Q, Enter JD, Amazon, and the rest of them squash everybody.
Well, yeah.
Shame, no. Hopefully not. But no. I'm really rooting for a win in Nigerian e-commerce. I mean, it's been somewhat disappointing in the last 5 years to see, this fever pitch excitement in that scene within the Nigerian tech environment go from, fever pitch to the reality setting in that, hey, maybe this is going to take a little longer than we'd hoped to build. But certainly no momentum lost over at cars45.com. They've raised $5 million worth of investment in a Series A round from the Frontier Cars Group. Now they are a holding company whose backers include the likes of Balderton Capital, Echo VC, TPG Growth, and NEA. Not bad going at all.
Absolutely. Cars45.com. It's selling your car in 45 minutes.
That's what they claim.
Yeah, that's an extremely aggressive value proposition. But essentially, they'll evaluate your car, they'll give you an inspection, and you sell your car and you get it paid instantly. So I think for entrepreneurs, I mean, we know that the auto industry in places like Nigeria is extremely haphazard and not necessarily organized. So I think this as an inverted commas disruptor, adding value, it seems right through the value chain. Valuations, appointments, all of the stuff happens online, which I think is great. So I think this is a win for the automotive industry.
So look, I mean, it's a marketplace in a sense where you can get your car evaluated and you can buy other cars, and like you said, it points to a pain point in the Nigerian market where there's a lot of crooked dealing in terms of like trying to get to purchase a vehicle, and their promise is sort of to take the pain out of like buying a secondhand vehicle. And the reason I'm sort of bullish on this idea is because it seems to more organically solve an actual pain point, that you stop any sort of upwardly mobile Nigerian who's in the market for a vehicle or has bought one before. They'll more than likely tell you that they've experienced some of the issues that Cars 45 is looking to solve. And I feel sometimes that that's what might have been lacking in some of the other e-commerce propositions made to the South African, to the Nigerian market. It's a great problem. It's definitely an innovation. It's making our lives easier, but it doesn't speak as eloquently to a pain point that I would love to get fixed now. And that's not to say all the other things won't work because they're not there yet. I just feel like this is a lot, like speaks more directly to like an actual problem.
Yeah. And Deloitte recently released a study that says that only 1.5 million new vehicles were registered across the continent. So it's a huge second-hand market opportunity. And I think if they're able to capture that in such a way, as we said, that they can address the pain point, I really think they're onto something great here. And then there's spin-offs, right? So at the moment, we know that most of that is a cash market, right? So those smart fintech startups and or fintech businesses, can you finance those people? Potentially opportunity.
Again, I'm rooting for a win in e-commerce, in Nigerian e-commerce. So big up to you guys out there. I'm hoping to actually speak to someone high up at Cars 45 so I can ask all these tough questions to them and just, I do expect though that to get the kind of VC interest they've received, they must have some significant traction at play. And this is not just, a sort of speculative investment. But yeah, well done to them. And of course, in the light of Rocket Internet's investments in e-commerce within Nigeria, like really, really struggling, and the group in Europe struggling to justify its existence at this point, it's nice to see signs of promise in that market. Now, to round off, today you'll end up with some international news. We know that Uber is still feeling the heat. No small thanks to the CEO in the US. Yeah, he hasn't made his PR department's life easy in the last few months. Certainly lots of problems at that company we know about. Facebook and Google, of course, having declared war on fake news. Yawn.
That's so disingenuous. We're declaring war on fake news. Down with fake news. Yeah, right. Are you going to make sure that happens?
Yeah, whatever. And anyway. But it's Airbnb that sort of caught my attention in terms of their plans for the continent. Now they plan, and this is straight from, the CEO's mouth. He spoke to the folks over at dailymaverick.co.za. He was in the country recently expounding on the company's plans for Africa. And I have to say, there's that world domination-esque vibe to some of the things he was saying. I mean, They plan to double the growth of their customers on the continent, double their customer base from 765,000. Who knew they were already that big, to like 1.5 million in the next 12 months. That is craziness. I wonder what the folks at Hotel NG would make of that kind of stuff. What do you make of this shared economy vibe sort of sweeping the continent, being led very easily by the Silicon Valley dark horses?
Yeah, those numbers are huge. I didn't realize it was that big, but I think the shared economy, once again, as long as the value gets passed on and created for the consumer, so it's not a bad thing. But I do think that shared economy in emerging markets versus shared economy in emerged markets may be a slightly different implementation issue. Airbnb, as far as their plans to take over the world, are certainly encouraging, but I often wonder how much of their model they're adjusting for our context. And and I'd say the same of an Uber. I'd say the same of a Facebook. My biggest criticism for Uber, as an example, is I think in an emerging market, they're at their core not a people-centric business. So when you come to a market like this, we are people-centric consumers. So you have to adjust things like labor relations in order to make your business model work. So shared economy, I think, is a great notion and a great concept. What I always kind of push back on, as far as being too quick to sing the praises, is how much localizing do you do within the business model that has been successful in emerged markets. So that's always kind of my hesitation. But as I said, those numbers for me are frighteningly high.
So Airbnb CEO, co-founder, speaking to some of what you're pointing out, Brian Chesky actually taking the time out to visit, the townships while he was in Cape Town, and
I went to go see the animals and the blacks.
Yeah, where the blacks live. So he basically came to see the people.
Sorry, but I'm not allowed to say that.
Let's just be honest. So he basically went where the blacks live in Cape Town, and basically he's granting these interviews, and he's, I think, trying to give project this image that, look, we're for you, we're part of this, we're proponents of the sharing economy, everyone benefits. It's not a top down thing. You certainly don't get that from Kalanick over at Uber. You get a much more dominating vibe, like we're here to win, and it seems like Brian Chesky's not about that. It's like, listen, as the pie grows for us, it grows for everybody. So in Asia for 3 weeks, and Airbnb would have been really convenient for me to book, and I'll tell you why. My wife and I chose to go with regular hotels, and it's probably a stupid fear. Black folk who's actually used Airbnb, please tell me that more often than not this is not true. But I kept feeling like I'm going to expose myself to how horribly prejudiced people can be towards black travelers, and I felt like everywhere I'd want to stay, no one would want me to stay there, and so. Yeah, there's that thing about Airbnb specifically. They grew huge in Cape Town, no doubt because Cape Town is the jewel of South Africa, and as far as tourism is concerned, and there seems to be an inherent classism to how well the average African can benefit from something like Airbnb, either through using the platform as a user looking for somewhere to stay, or actually putting something on there to rent out.
That's such a fascinating thought. I'm sitting here scratching my head about if I've ever had any considerations along that line. So I've used Airbnb a couple of times, a lot of the time in Cape Town, in a number of African countries, and I'd never really considered it from the perspective that I'm booking a place that may put me outside of my comfort zone, and am I okay with that? Because from an experience perspective, I don't know whether that's the value proposition that they're selling. I think the value proposition from Airbnb is kind of this home away from home, so comfort is inherent in that. So the concept of being out of your comfort zone or not feeling completely comfortable, I think is outside of their value proposition, but that is potentially a different value proposition for someone who likes to travel and see the world and, go to book themselves in a Japanese a home through a platform and acceptedly know that they may not necessarily have all the comforts of home, but it'll be a new and different cultural experience. But I don't believe that is what Airbnb's value proposition is, based on how I've experienced it. It's very much, for me, feels like a McDonald's solution that you're going to try and pay for a certain standard of either comfort or luxury or referenced comfort or behavior. And anything that's a little bit strange or outside of that would be kind of betraying the brand promise, I think. I'm not sure. I haven't thought about it that.
So from a comfort standpoint, I'm thinking that's what I'm scared of almost discovering or not discovering or being disappointed about. Like, I'd expect, for example, not to be treated poorly or not to be refused access to somebody's home because of I'm a certain color, or oh heck, we loved you until we saw your picture, that kind of thing. And there's that apprehension that I need to work through, and I don't know whether anybody listening to this podcast can relate to that, and whether it's even a factor to growing in a place like Africa, or indeed in parts of the developing world where, let's be honest, the vast majority of the people using the service have to be not black.
Because there's so many dynamics to that question. I mean, in a market, especially like the Asian market, where it is difficult, especially when you're talking about homes, because this is about renting or giving people shared space in people's homes. I don't think they're the kind of people that are apologetic about their culture or apologetic about what they do. So whether they're going to step outside of their own comfort or culture to try and make that comfort for someone else is also interesting. And I don't know the answer to the question, but that fundamentally could be an answer or an argument that says you will be either accepted or not accepted. Other places in the world, main cities, Londons of the world, I think less so. But when you're in an extreme environment where people's homes and they're renting them out, they're not going to apologize or try and make it any more comfortable for you. I wonder. I really do.
And so for that reason, I think platforms like hotels.ng, not least because they're not in the home sort of share market necessarily, but also just because I think they speak more directly to what quote unquote average African traveler might be looking for in a place to stay. I feel like they probably speak more organically to that. And I know Airbnb does offer us like hotel type accommodation as well and that kind of thing, but I do sense that there's nuances to our markets and what we look for as Africans when we travel and where we want to stay and how comfortable we want to be, not just from a material sense, but also from a cultural sense, and not that I'd be difficult to please necessarily, but I'd certainly be sensitive to someone clearly showing me they're uncomfortable having me around, perhaps because I'm a tall black man, for example, and they're not sure how to behave around me. That would affect my travel, experience differently.
Yeah. Having said that, I mean, there are really, to validate your concerns, maybe there are, platforms like Travel Noir and a number of kind of more diverse travel platforms and travel experiences, I think, that are coming to the fore that are trying to bridge that gap between expectation and experience. And I think for that very reason, I think there may be a play there that actually makes sense, and that people may want to have a degree of acceptance when they travel, but they still want to have the experience. The either extreme may not be comfortable, but somewhere in the middle may make sense. So yeah, I think there's options, but
and I'm sure Airbnb is thinking about it, because I know they've launched like experiences as part of their mix of opportunities. I think they're selling more than just I think late last year they came to the market with this notion that you can book experiences with them, not just places to stay. And I'm sure they take some of these things into account as well.
Maybe you're just sensitive.
Maybe that's it. So finally, it's a pity to end on such a sad note, but I think it's more an informative note, and it's more a heads up really to parents like you who are raising young guns and gals in troubling times, really, as far as what the kind of trouble the internet can bring into a home. Who knew you could bring in suicidal tendencies by you could introduce the idea of killing yourself to your child by buying them an iPhone. Well, it turns out you can. There's a game called the Blue Whale Suicide Game that's taken the UK and Russia particularly by storm, and it's this crazy role-playing game that actually gets people to do horrible tasks. I think there's something like 50.
Yeah, there is. It like takes you through different scenarios essentially as a player of the game. It's developed by a guy called Philip Budakin. Now, essentially, this game it leads you down different paths, but they all end up essentially at a point where you have to make a decision about killing yourself or not. Now, what is bizarre about this game is that the creator is a 21-year-old Russian, and he's actually confessed to the crimes. But the weird thing is that he's convinced himself, and he believes that he's actually cleansing the community. He's cleansing the world. He's saying kind of there's a separation of people that should belong and that shouldn't, and certain human beings are biological waste, as he calls them, and so he believes that this game is going to be a way that we can get rid of this biological waste by allowing them to take their own lives. So it's quite bizarre and it's quite frightening. And I know at the moment there's a lot of ISPs are trying to ban the game. There's been about, I think, 50 girls that have already lost their lives in Russia, Budapest, somewhere around there. But the major concern is if this game spreads further, we never know. People will be taken to the streets and trying to essentially kill themselves by thinking that they're playing a game.
So the reason we raise this is because this is likely to reach our shores at some point, Africa, and this is a shout out to all parents. You need to know what your kids are into. I know we don't want to go preachy on you, but this is a fact. It's we can't pretend the world is safe, and unfortunately, it plays into many of the arguments people who want to take our freedom of the internet away from us would love to point at. I mean, these are examples of how, freedoms can be taken, advantage of, and we need to be on top of what our children are watching. Get whatever software you need to get, delay that first iPhone for as long as possible, and certainly, be a hands-on parent with regards to your child's digital health, and the games they're playing and the trends they're trying to follow, and the friends they're trying to make. Okay?
Yeah, there's always a dark side to technology, and maybe that's topic for a show. I mean, it does, as you can hear, our voice and our energy has gone down because it's unfortunate, but we need to stay woke. Technology does have a dark side, and that dark side is real. So as parents, as guardians, and even as young people, I mean, it's important that you're aware of these things. I don't think this kind of thing will go away, but I do think that there's an important education job to be done. So yeah, be vigilant. Be very vigilant.
So yeah, that rounds it up. Many thanks, Mr. Kalenga. It's been a guest having you on the show. I look forward to doing this again. It's been a much longer show than usual. We just had quite a few things to get through that we both thought were too important to leave out for us.
Yeah, like everything.
And we're glad we got to it all. Our show is not necessarily going to be an hour long each time we get together, probably at least half of that. So in case this is your first show, don't worry about it. We typically only go through about maybe 5 or 6 major stories a week, so keep it nice and bite-sized. But before we go, one last time, I'd like to thank the team behind the Afrobytes Tech Conference 2017 for sponsoring this episode of the African Tech Roundup. Now, we truly can't wait to see you all in Paris come June 8th and 9th. Yeah, it's going to be a blast, so get that information and register at afrobyte.com. And so that's it, man. Musa, this is where I say something like, so I'm Andile Masugu.
And my name is Musa Kalenga.
Thanks for listening
to Africa Tech Roundup.
To take care, Africa.